Welcome back to this week's episode of the Women and Money Cafe. Now, as you know, we're all about breaking down this taboo about money. And sometimes we ask ourselves, how can we make it even more taboo? And Emily came up with a cracking suggestion. And that was this episode, The Cost of Dying. Because if we don't really like talking about money, and we're not terribly great at talking about death, let's put the two together and let's talk about the cost of dying. And this is a really interesting one because you don't know about this until you find yourself in the situation of having to deal with it. And when you're in the situation of having to deal with it, you're probably not best placed to be trying things for the very first time, if the truth be told. So I've got some interesting stats I'm going to throw out at you. So apparently, every day, the partner of 75 men under the age of 50 dies. And every day, the partner of 500 women under the age of 50 dies. And that's leaving around about 100 children each day without a parent. Now, they're pretty powerful stats. So this is a real thing that is happening every day. And like it or not, one day we are going to find ourselves in a situation having to deal with this stuff. So you might be thinking, yeah, this isn't one of your uplifting episodes, so I might just skip this. But you might want to bookmark it or save it because you're going to need it at some point. So over the course of the next 25 minutes or so, what we're going to do is hopefully give you all the information that you need to know should you find yourself in this situation. Or if you know someone that might just need a bit of help, they're having to deal with that. So that's what we're doing today. So on the sofa today, I'm going to work my way along the sofa. So right next to me, I've got Sarah.
Hello.
Welcome back to the sofa, Sarah. It's good to have you back.
Good to be back, Julie.
Right. Today, the woman with all the hard facts and stats is Emily.
Hi, everyone.
Hi there, Emily. And then at the far end of the sofa, Michelle.
Bye.
All right. Right. Welcome, everybody, to this episode. So I know that on the sofa, we have varying degrees of experience of funerals. And I just thought what we'll do is we'll go through the costs kind of step by step, and then we'll just throw in and share our experience and little anecdotes that we've had. So it's those little hints and tips that Google aren't going to give you that you only get from real life experience. We're going to share them with you today. So Emily, do you want to kick us off with what your research has found?
Yes, so I recommend everyone, if they've got a spare half an hour, to find this report that I found on the internet, and it's called the Cost of Dying Report. And it's a report that's done every year by Sun Life. And what they do is they interview and survey about 1,500 funeral providers. And sorry, I think I said that the wrong way around. They interview about 100 funeral providers, 10 from each 10 regions in the country, and then about 1,500 people who over the last few years have organized funerals, and they ask them various different things about what they thought about various costs and what they spent their money on and their views on things, etc., etc. So I will be dropping bits and pieces in as we go through. But I think it was a really useful eye-opener for me. I don't have a great deal of experience myself of organizing a funeral. In fact, I haven't even been to that many, touch wood. Last one I vividly remember was my grandmother's about 10, 15 years ago. And bless her, she died in winter. And on the day of her funeral, there was a ridiculously heavy snowstorm. And she didn't even turn up at her own funeral because the hearse couldn't get through the snowstorm. And I turned up late too. I managed to get a cup of tea and a sandwich at the wait before I had to turn around and go back. But yeah, so I'm not greatly placed to talk from a personal perspective, but I know that some of you unfortunately are. So lovely to share this knowledge with.
Okay, so let's do a quick straw poll. Feel free to play along, listeners, all right, of how much we think the average funeral costs. Emily, you're not allowed to play because I know you've researched the answer. Sarah, what do you think the average cost of a funeral is in the UK this year?
I would say between 7,000 and 8,000.
Right. Michelle?
I'd probably say around 9,000.
Okay. I'm going to come at 5,000. Right, so Emily, answers, please.
Well, of course, it depends, doesn't it? It depends on where you live. It depends on whether you're having a cremation or a burial or a direct cremation. And it depends on what frills and fancy bits you put around the edges. But that, we can talk a little bit more about those bits and pieces. But basically, the report says the average cost in the UK of a funeral was all of the bits and pieces. So broken up into 3 parts, being the actual cost of the funeral, which is the cremation or the burial, then the party and all the extra bits, such as notices in newspapers and order of service sheets, etc. Maybe choir and musicians, catering, etc. The second part. And then the third part is the legal side of things, such as probate fees and things like that. So all of those 3 elements together, on average in this country, will cost you, drum roll, well done, Michelle, £9,200.
Wow.
On the nose there, Lily. Yeah, it's a lot of money. But obviously it's cheaper in different regions. Obviously London being much more expensive, particularly for the funeral costs, and the southeast obviously coming in close second after that, and Northern Ireland, Wales, Scotland, a bit cheaper for the funeral costs, and all the other bits really. Yeah.
Right. So we've got a headline figure there about 9,200, and obviously we're going to have regional variations. So that's quite a sizable amount of money. But you were saying that, Emily, that you can kind of break this down into 3 areas. So let's talk about this first of all. So the first one you mentioned was like, without getting too macabre about it, what are we actually going to do with the body? Are we burying it? Are we cremating it? These kind of these are the first options that we have. So, what information, knowledge, experience do we have on the 2 choices?
I sort of jump in with that one. So unfortunately, it's the people on the sofa now. I've had experience of this when both my parents died about 4 years ago. And I think for me, it sounded me the choices you get given and the cost that goes with those choices. Now, I don't know if it's probably most people they've already decided if they want to be buried or cremated generally, least expensive option of the 2. But it was the cost of the funeral director and where that sounds awful, where that body goes, and it's held until such time as the funeral happens, because that's the start of it. And I think that was what surprised me. That's the start of the whole expense journey. So I knew my parents wanted to be cremated, and for me, it was like, okay, I went to a funeral director and said, this is what they want. And he gave me a basic price and then you add on from there. As Emily said, you add on those other bits and pieces.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, Michelle. That was the bit that shocked me. It wasn't we knew grandma wanted to be cremated. It was the collecting of the body cost, storing of the body. You had options on the storage and all sorts of things. And then how she was prepared for her cremation. And then they sit you down with a glossy brochure and say, well, do you want wicker? Do you want gold? Do you want wood? Yeah, it was never ending list. And it's a lot to take in at the time as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a shock to the system because you're not in an emotional place to deal with it that easily. And I think you sit there and you try to want to do the best for those people.
Yeah.
But you also have to be mindful of cost, because you know that there's all these other things that come afterwards. And I think, Emily will go on to cover a lot of them, but even some of them, you're surprised by the cost of them.
Yes.
And we were delayed, unfortunately, it sounds awful, with my mum by Easter, which actually increased the cost because we had to have the Easter weekend. So that increased all the costs sort of moving forward. And I was very lucky that the funeral director was very helpful, but I've also had friends with experiences where it hasn't been quite as, I suppose, not easy, but straightforward and someone helping you.
Mm. Yeah.
Michelle, as you think back to that experience, is there anything in particular that you can remember that surprised you, the cost of it?
I think one, the surprise of the coffin. I'd always had a bit of a joke with my parents, and they were very down to earth and very sort of don't want anything expensive. And actually my dad had an illness, so he planned his own funeral. So I'd been through that process with him and my mum prior to my dad passing away. So I had a good idea, of course, but I can remember him saying, I'm not spending that much money on that coffin. Don't be so ridiculous. You'll use that money for something else. So I kind of had an idea, I guess, but I wasn't the one making the decision. For my mum, where it was very unexpected, had to make a decision. I knew she had the same kind of thoughts, but you also have a sense of duty that you want to do something that's worthy of her, because at that point, I'd lost both, and it's pretty weird. It's a really weird sort of feeling that you're sat there doing this. But yeah, it is an over sense of duty, I think, and picking the right thing that, my mum used to go, I don't care if I'm in a cardboard box when we'd be having the conversation. I couldn't put my mum in a cardboard box in front of everybody that was coming to the service. What would I be? So there is that kind of expectation thing you put on yourself, not other people. You do put it on yourself.
Looking back, because I can remember having to be involved with organising my dad's funeral. When I say I can remember, I did it. I don't actually remember it. And I wonder if, looking back now, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give to yourself if you had to do this again?
So we're talking about dying. It's not the nicest subject, but I have a folder in my filing cabinet that is called When I'm Gone. Because doing that for both my parents really made me think, what songs do I want at my funeral? What do I want people to wear? What coffin do I want? What kind of service do I want? Both neither of my parents were particularly religious, so we had a celebrant and you paid for it. And I actually have a book which I bought. It was actually from Amazon, and it's kind of been a guide, and it actually shows me and tells my family what I want. I haven't shown them because I don't want to have that conversation with my teenage daughters, but it's there in writing what I would like to have.
I think that's amazing, Michelle. I think that's the best gift you can give someone beyond the grave, isn't it? That certainty, that guidance.
Because otherwise you don't know. And I was guessing, I had my auntie and I were trying to, what music would she like? I know we knew her favourite songs, but you're narrowing it down to 3 songs to cover her life. That's very hard. I can't listen to those songs, but at least if I've written it down and it's there, I've given them a guide to what I want. They can change it, they can, but it's a guide to what I would like.
All right. So thank you for sharing that with us. So Emily, do you have any information for us then that just compares kind of the cost of what you can expect of being cremated versus being buried?
Yeah, well, obviously, as you would imagine, being buried is a lot more expensive than being cremated. Being buried, the average cost is coming on for £5,000, so 4,800. Cremation will cost 3,700. And then there's a sort of subsector of cremation, which I was quite interested in, and that's called direct cremation. Now, apparently, this is something that's becoming a lot more commonplace these days. Direct cremation is otherwise known as the pauper's funeral. So it would be when they would gather up the bodies and deal with them, and then perhaps return the ashes to the family. So there's nothing particularly personal about that cremation process. It is a process. It deals with the problem of the body, and then at least the family will get the ashes and then can do with them what they wish and have their own party and whatever. So that direct cremation cost is only about £1,500. So that's a massive difference between the burial cost and the cremation, the other sort of more personal cremation cost. And as you can imagine, during COVID, because of all the restrictions around gatherings, the direct cremation became very popular. It was the way that most people dealt with things. And as a result, the trend has continued, and people are becoming a lot more into the idea of having less traditional funerals and maybe just having a big party for a celebration of life, which they don't need to worry about, people watching a coffin depart behind a curtain for. It's a separate thing that, yes, you might have the ashes to deal with separately, but it doesn't have to involve bodies. So that's quite an interesting fact. And it's something that I think I would look into myself. Or
Right.
there is a fourth thing that we haven't mentioned, and it's not really covered so much in the report, but actually in my will, I've given my body to medical science. I don't know if it's going to be any good to them by the time I've finished with it. But yeah, I just thought, wow, it's a vessel, and I'll let them see if they can use it to do good in the world.
Right. So you've just saved your family a couple of £1,000.
Yeah, I don't know if I've completely saved them. That's the bit that's missing in this report, actually. So whether or not they get returned some ashes of something, I don't know. But
All right.
anyway, I'd hope that there's something that they can remember me by.
Okay, so at the start you were telling us the average cost is about 9,200, and the biggest chunk of that is obviously on it's body disposal, folks. I wish I'd thought of a nicer way to put it, but I haven't.
It is.
But with COVID, we've got this the rise of direct cremation, where everybody was Zooming their funerals, which seems to be hanging around there now as a thing. So that's taken care of quite a big chunk of that 9,200. Then the second segment of costs that you started to talk about with these professional services. So what does that mean, Emily?
So professional services would be the legal costs largely. So that would be where you have to get somebody involved in doing the executor duties to the will. So obviously when you do a will, you name your executors. Most people, because I do will writing as well, and most people are so insistent that they name a member of their family as an executor. And I do think it's quite funny that they're so insistent. And they also make sure that if they've got, 2 children, that they put both of them as executor, not just the one who would actually be any good at doing the job. I would remind people that when they're doing their will, they're choosing somebody who's going to be in charge of doing some really mundane administrative tasks, such as valuing the estate, dealing with bank accounts, registering the death, talking to utilities companies, doing all of this stuff. It has to be somebody who's going to be able to deal with it and deal with it quickly. So don't think that it's a popularity contest amongst your children. Pick the person that's going to do a good job of it. And if you don't pick a family member, feel free to pick probate or executor company who can do the executor duties and the probate. Yes, there's a fee for it, but it doesn't have to be a lot of money. I think, generally speaking, the company that I work for executor and probate services charge about £1,500, £2,000 for an average size estate. Solicitors will charge you a lot more, but that's what we're talking about for the professional services. And then obviously you've got the actual cost that you pay to government for getting probate. If you've got an estate of under £5,000, there is no fee. And if it's over £5,000, it's £273. So it's not too bad, but yeah, it's got to be factored in.
All right, ladies, Sarah Michelle, what's been your experience of dealing with the so-called professional services, but, the solicitors?
We didn't, because we had executors who were family members. And yes, it was shared out, Emily. So we didn't have to deal with professional services. It was just the funeral home, other than dealing with probate and government departments sorting out her affairs.
All right. Thanks, Sarah. What about yourself? Michelle, did you get involved with this last stuff?
I didn't get involved with this list there. I guess where I'm lucky with what I do, as a job that I have a fair knowledge. And I also had a colleague whose wife actually does probate services. So I sort of worked with her and actually went through the process with her because it was something that I wanted to understand what was happening. Just my nature, what was happening. But I think it is important you get somebody to guide you in the right way. And as Emily said, all those bits of phoning, I mean, I spent hours and hours on the phone and to sort everything out because I had a house to sort out. I had a car to deal with. I had a positive. And my mum died without a will. So that made it slightly more complicated in terms of probate, who was going to be dealing with it and what would happen. So there is an awful lot of administration, and I think if you can get somebody to help you with that, I would always say, yeah, if you have no experience. I was lucky, I understand the process. I wasn't in a great emotional place, but I understand. For somebody who doesn't understand it, it is a bit of a minefield, and I would always advocate
Right.
I would also just say that if there's a couple, first death amongst the couple is normally fairly straightforward. So often property is owned jointly, there are bank accounts that are owned jointly, and usually there's a will that largely says everything goes to the surviving spouse. So in that situation, it's pretty straightforward, and therefore professional help may not be required. On second death, particularly where the children are very bereaved or just don't have the skills or the time, that's where you definitely want to be considering getting a couple of quotes in for professionals to come in and help, because I think it could just save an awful lot of stress and agonizing when it's not necessary, especially if it's an estate that can afford it. Why worry about spending £2,500 if that just takes the problem away?
Right, I'm going to throw in my top tip here. You ladies won't be surprised at what I'm about to say. So you're getting the solicitor to do it for you, and they're going to be quoting you what the fees and charges are. People, we don't like percentage charging. Solicitors may offer to do it on a percentage of the estate. No. Every time we want a flat fee. That's my top tip. Yeah, me and my percentage charging. So we've kind of covered off then the professional services bit, and Emily has given us some great tips there, and Michelle and Sarah have both given us examples of when you can do it yourself and when really just to get an expert involved, because you're not in the right place to be doing it yourself, especially if it's not a world that you're used to dealing with. So then I think there was a third category of costs that you touched on, Emily. So we've touched, the body, the professional services. What was that third category you mentioned?
Yes, so the third category is what they call the send-offs. And this is the one that I like the best, because this is the one where you can have some fun. And this is the one maybe where you probably could do with the most amount of input from the person who is deceased. So this is the one where you can chat to your mother, father, brother, sister, whatever, over a cup of tea in a jovial way, ideally when they're not ill, have a joke, have a laugh, make it part of the conversation. What sort of funeral would you like? What music do you like? What would you like to be played? Would you like to have people wear dark clothes or nice, colourful clothes? Are you wanting flowers, or would you just prefer people to give money to charity or things like that? I imagine you can sort of tighten up the finer details of when it comes nearer the time if there is a pressing need. But I think there's no harm in having a more light-hearted conversation with friends and relatives when it isn't an imminent event. So yeah, the send-off includes all sorts of things. So let me just scroll down.
You pick up the details. My mom has given me very, very explicit instructions, right down to the fact that it has to be round tables, because she's always felt round tables encourage conversation more. She thinks they're more sociable. I know what a standard of food is expected, and I better make sure that that's adhered to. What music? Red wine, in case anybody's wondering. That's what the coffin's disappearing to.
Lovely.
See, and I think a conversation like that is a sort of a nice, gentle way into the more serious side of, are we being buried? Are we cremated? What kind of coffin do you want? How many pallbearers do you want? Pallbearers, hearses, stuff like that. That's not as much fun, but round tables and food and wine are a little bit more fun.
My late grandma did it as a letter of wishes with her will.
Ah, right.
So it was all part of that. So she didn't expect it necessarily to be strictly followed, but she said, this is what I would like. And you do what you think or do the best you can. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we knew all the songs and everything else. Yeah.
I encourage my clients to do that too. Some of them have got very specific things they want to put in the will document itself. No. Hold off. You might change your mind. We'll just put it in the letter of wishes. So that's really, really easy to do and a great suggestion. Also, there is a tool that's online developed alongside this cost of dying report, and it's called My Perfect Send-Off or something. We'll put a link in the show notes, but it will allow you to design your own send-off, and you could do it with your partner. And that's what I would really encourage you to discuss what you want to happen. Anyway, so I've got the list here of things that people spend those little extras on. Would anyone like to hazard a guess as to what is the thing that people spend the most on at all those little extra things that you can have?
Is this for
Other
the
than-
send-off or for the service?
Well, it's called the send-off, but it includes any extras. So anything that isn't professional services or disposing of the body. So
Does
it could-
disposing of the body include transporting the body?
So I think it would in its basic sense, but not if you were wanting a horse and carriage or a limousine.
Right, so hearses and things like that.
Gosh.
What do people spend the most money on? I don't know. I'm going to guess hearses or flowers.
It's flowers.
Right.
Yeah. Apparently 66% of people do spend a lot of money on flowers. I don't know if I'm reading that right, but anyway, that's top of the list. 66%. Order of service sheets, 49% of people saying they're spending money on that.
Right.
Memorials, so I guess that could be, a park bench or a tree or a headstone or something like that. That's 41%. Death notices and funeral notices in newspapers, etc. And I think they're actually quite expensive. I think it's about £80 to put a notice into the newspaper.
And I don't know if this is just Scottish funerals, because obviously they're the ones I go to, but if they do this in England as well, but you get the little card, the little laminated card with a picture of the person that's died on it with a little poem or something underneath. All right, you're all shaking your head at me. This is a Scottish thing. So we go to funerals and you get a little tiny laminated card. It's got a nice photo of the person that's gone on it, and it'll maybe have like a little quote underneath it or a little poem. So, all right, no, you've not heard about this. It must
Sounds like a nice idea.
I've got, unfortunately, quite a few of them, I'm afraid. But they're nice little keepsakes. And like, if I know my mum keeps one of my dad in a purse.
Yeah.
So,
It reminds me, I actually found one of those on a train once back from London. And it was they're so random. It really brightened my afternoon when I was reading about this person, and then I flipped over and read their favourite poem. I just thought that was really sweet. Didn't know them, but I sort of felt like I did.
right, so obviously then sort of the after show party, let's call it what it is. So we're having disposing of the body. We're having the after show party, the wake or whatever you want to call it. Now, I'm going to guess that obviously this could be as expensive or as cost effective as you like. But Emily, do you have like an average number for us?
Yeah.
Because I think people find that helpful for a benchmark. You're like, okay, if the average is £2,500, and you're like, yeah, but I want to go all out, so I'll maybe go to 3 or 4, or like the average is 2.5. I can't afford that. I'm going to go 1.5, but I'm not that far off the average.
Yes. So doing the maths, if it's the average is 9,200, we're spending about 4,000 on the funeral, and we're spending about 2.5 on the professional fees. That leaves roughly 2,700 for the send off on this
Right.
average.
Okay,
figures.
so obviously these are averages. It depends. I'm going to guess one of the big factors is the age of the person that's passed away. Because the older they are, the fewer of their peers are around. Whereas if you've got a young person, you're going to tend to have a lot more people there.
Yeah, but I do think there's a trend now, probably for younger people, not to do it in the traditional way. So the traditional way being maybe a church service or cremation, a lot of people, pallbearers, cards, flowers, all these trimmings, because that was what people did and that was what was expected. And now, like I say, there's more of a trend perhaps towards the direct cremation, big parties, celebration of life, kind of thing. But no, there were some tips in this report, which I'll just say. So the ways that you can save a bit of money for the send-off is, you don't have to put these notices in newspapers. You could do that on social media, which wouldn't cost you anything. You don't obviously need smart cars or whatever to get the body to the venue. Catering can be as much or as little as you like. Obviously, if you provide a free bar, that's going to cost money. People don't turn up unless you're my father-in-law, and he hopefully doesn't listen to this podcast. You don't turn up to funerals expecting a free lunch and a few pints of beer. People would be prepared to buy their own drinks and things. Or you can have it at home, There's nothing wrong with putting the kettle on and having it at home. there's some ideas.
All right. So there's some good tips. Is there anything else that you'd like to add, Michelle?
I think the one thing that hasn't really been mentioned in this, which was one of my biggest surprises when doing this. So having got to a point then where I'd obviously had dad's funeral, mum's funeral. So that was 4 months apart. So I then had 2 sets. And I wanted to have somewhere where they go. I didn't want them in my house. That was just one thing I could deal with. So I then had to go to my local council and I wanted them to be in sort of the local graveyard so we could go and see them. You pay for this plot of land. So you've got 2 sets of ashes in a very small box and you have to pay for that for a number of years. So 50 or 100 years. So that's another cost, which I hadn't, anticipated because we never got that far with my dad's planning as such. And then the headstone. And I think that was the biggest shock I ever had because it was a headstone for both of them. And, you know, I love my parents to bits. There's a lot of letters in their names. And then you add your message as to what you want underneath. And I can still remember sat with the funeral director and he said to me, right, what's their full names? So I gave their full names and then you have the dates. And then I had a message from us and I didn't have much change for £2,000.
Whoa.
So it was
Wow.
made out of, it was obviously made out of stone and everything else. And I think that was the bit that shocked me the most because I hadn't anticipated, I'd never had to do it, but you're charged by the letter. I'm not going to not write something because it's going to cost me more money because I want it to be nice. But I was quite surprised.
All
It
right.
just
So
cost the fact.
I think myself and Emily have sorted on that front. We've got reasonably short names, haven't we?
Yeah.
Michelle, you might be wanting to get in touch with Deedpool at some point in the future.
I've got 3 first names and a surname. I've got no hope.
Right. No, that's great insight. Thank you for that. And then Sarah, is there anything else that you would like to add?
Well, there's also, so the church where Grandma wanted her ashes scattered, even though they were just going to be scattered because it's on holy ground, there was still a charge for that. They did have an area where ashes could be just buried. They had like a plot where they could be buried and just a really simple little plaque, still a charge for that. So even though she just wanted to be scattered because all her relatives are there, mum, dad, brother, grandpa sort of got a look at, yeah, still a charge for that. I mean, that probably varies, church, parish, whatever, but there's a charge for that as well.
Right. I don't think I should share what we did with my dad's ashes because I'm not sure it's entirely legal. I'll just say my dad was a very keen ice hockey player when he was younger. And on the site of his favourite ice rink, they were dispersed off there covertly. I'm not going to name the hockey rink so nobody can come after me. There's no proof.
What did everyone think? Because they were just skating around. Yeah, someone.
The ice rink's not there anymore. It's not there anymore.
That's all right.
It's something else, but I maybe won't share that in case it puts
Yeah.
people off. Okay. So moving swiftly on. Right. So it wasn't the most exciting rock and roll episode of the Women Money Cafe ever, but we have shared with you hopefully some really key vital information. I hope you can take away from this conversation is that now you know maybe how to start the conversation, be it with parents, partners, anybody, or a friend you've got going through it. Start the conversation, get prepared a little bit. And at least now you're not walking into with the unknown. You've got a rough idea thanks to Emily's research of the hard facts and figures. And big thanks to Michelle and Sarah for sharing their personal experiences with us. Anything else, ladies?
No, just get talking and planning your big send-off.
Thank you very much for listening to us. And thank you to the team for chipping in on this episode. Until next time, please take care of yourselves.